I learned what justice was the day they took my name away, not all at once, not dramatically. There was no proclamation, no blade, no sermon echoing through a cathedral of skulls. It happened quietly, the way most things happen in the Imperium. One line crossed out, one designation stamped, one life reduced to a reference number that fit more neatly into a ledger than a memory ever could. The steel beneath my boots was older than the idea of innocence. I could feel it through the soles, a constant vibration that never stopped, not even in sleep. Somewhere far below, reactors roared and presses screamed as they crushed raw matter into tools of war. Somewhere far above, spires cut the smog like knives, and people who would never know my face spoke the word justice as if it belonged to them.
I was born in Hive Lithazium, mid-tier Civic Quadrant Grey 7. My mother used to say the Hive hummed me to sleep before she ever did. I believe her. Even now, decades later, when the lights dim and the air grows thin, I still feel the walls listening. Justice, they told us, was the Emperor's will made manifest. Justice was order. Justice was obedience rewarded and deviation corrected. Justice was clean, precise, mathematical. That was how the Lex Imperialis described it. Printed in ink so small it discouraged reading, and bound in volumes so heavy they discouraged lifting. We were taught that justice did not care who you were, that it was blind. They never told us it was also deaf. I was a citizen in good standing for most of my life. Manufactorum laborer, assembly line theta, shift rotation perpetual. I built shell casings for a war I would never see, and a front I would never understand. My hands learned the motions so well, they continued even when my thoughts wandered. 12 hours on, 6 hours off, 3 hours transit. Repeat. I paid my tithes. I attended the sermons broadcast through static-filled speakers mounted to rusted beams. I bowed when the Emperor's name was spoken, even when my knees ached and my stomach was empty. I believed, because belief was easier than thinking. The Arbites precinct sat like a tumor in the center of our district. All black stone and harsh angles, its walls polished clean by the passage of authority. You could always tell when you were close. The air changed. Less noise, fewer people. Even the hive seemed to lower its voice. Patrols moved in pairs, carapace armor gleaming dully beneath lumen strips, shock mauls resting casually in gauntleted hands. They never ran. Justice, after all, was never in a hurry. The first time I was processed, I thought it was a mistake, a clerical error, a misfiled work docket. That was what my supervisor said when the citation drone arrived, its vox rasping my designation with mechanical certainty. Minor infraction, schedule deviation, unauthorized absence of 9 minutes. 9 minutes, accumulated over 6 months, translated into a single charge. I remember feeling relieved. Justice, I thought, would see reason. The processing hall was vast and empty, designed to make one voice feel insignificant. I stood on a marked circle while servo skulls drifted overhead, lenses clicking, recording every tremor in my posture. A scribe sat behind a glass steel barrier, face obscured by data slates and augmetic lenses. He never looked at me directly. I spoke when prompted. I explained. I apologized. The verdict was delivered before I finished. Guilt was not something to be determined. It was something to be confirmed. The system already knew the outcome. The ritual merely justified it. Sentence: penal labor extension, 3 standard months added to my work term, rations reduced accordingly. Corrective justice, they called it. I went back to the line thinner and more tired, but wiser, or so I thought. Justice in the Imperium is not about what you have done. It is about what must be maintained. Order does not care about fairness. Order cares about continuity. A single missing bolt can doom a tank. A single missing man can doom a schedule. A single unpunished deviation can, in time, become a question. And questions are dangerous. I began to notice things after that. The way patrol routes shifted without explanation. The way neighbors disappeared and their habs were sealed with red wax bearing the aquila. The way sermons lingered longer on obedience and sacrifice than they once had.
the way the word mercy vanished from the vocabulary entirely, replaced by efficiency. The second time I encountered justice, it wore a different uniform.
The enforcers came during off-cycle, when most of us were asleep or pretending to be. They hit the habs in clusters, moving fast, boots striking metal in perfect unison. There was shouting. There was a stun flash. There was the sound of someone pleading through a door that would not open fast enough. They took my neighbor first, old Wren, who coughed black and smelled of machine oil. Crime, dissemination of unapproved speech. Someone had reported him for muttering during a sermon broadcast, for questioning why the emperor needed more children sent to the guard when the hive already starved. Justice does not weigh context. It removes variables. I watched through the crack in my door as they dragged him away, his feet scraping uselessly against the floor. He tried to speak. A shock baton silenced him. A scribe drone recorded the moment for archival purposes. By morning, his hab was reassigned. I told myself to forget it. Justice had been served. That was what the notices said, pasted over the sealed door in crisp black ink. The third time, justice learned my face. It was a riot, though no one called it that officially. Officially, it was a disruption of sanctioned workflow due to unauthorized emotional expression. A food shipment had been delayed. Again, tempers flared. Someone threw a tool. Someone else shouted. A chant started, died, then started again, louder. I did not chant. I did not throw anything. I stood still and kept my hands visible. It did not matter. When the Arbites arrived, they did not distinguish between voices. Crowd designation meant collective guilt. Shock rounds cracked through the air. Bodies fell. I felt pain bloom across my side and hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. Boots surrounded me. A visor reflected my own face back at me, small and distorted. I was guilty because I was present. Processing this time took longer, deeper. They took my prints, my blood, my retinal pattern, my work history, my family lineage. They asked questions I did not understand, and punished answers that did not align with data already stored. Justice is offended by inconsistency. The sentence was heavier: penal battalion conscription, conditional release upon survival quota fulfillment. I was given a uniform that did not fit and a number that replaced my name. My family was notified via form letter. Compensation denied. As I was marched through corridors lined with devotional reliefs depicting the emperor dispensing judgment with a flaming sword, I finally understood. Justice was not there to protect us. It was there to remind us what we were worth. And what we were worth was always less than the cost of questioning it. I learned more about justice in the holding transports than I ever did in sermons. I listened to men and women who had once been judges, clerks, Medicaid assistants, even an Arbites trainee whose only crime had been hesitating 1 second too long when ordered to strike a child. Justice had consumed them all eventually. It always does. A machine that feeds on compliance eventually runs out of outsiders. One man told me justice was a weapon. Another said it was a ritual to make cruelty feel sacred. A third laughed and said justice was just another manufactorum, and we were its raw materials. I stopped arguing. By the time we reached the front, justice had been simplified. Obey or die. Advance or be corrected. Kill or be an example. The commissars called it battlefield discipline. They spoke of fairness in execution, of equal punishment regardless of rank. They did not mention that rank determined how close you stood to the firing squad. I survived long enough to be discharged back into the hive, older, quieter, with eyes that no longer searched for fairness in the world. Now I walk past the Arbites precinct every cycle on my way to work. I lower my head. I keep my pace steady. I do not speak unless spoken to. Somewhere inside that black stone fortress, my file still exists, thicker now, heavier with annotations and marginal warnings. Justice remembers me, even if the hive does not. And I know now what justice truly is in the Imperium. It is not blind. It is watching. And it is patient. Justice followed me home. Not in the way stories describe, with banners and proclamations or armored boots kicking in doors. It followed me the way rust spreads, quietly, inevitably eating at the edges of everything I thought was stable. I would wake in the HAB unit assigned to me after discharge and feel the presence of it in the air, heavy and stale, like recycled oxygen that had passed through too many lungs before mine. The walls were thinner here. The lumen strips flickered more often. Somewhere above, pipes rattled with heated water meant for people who had never learned my number. I had survived the front. That alone marked me. Survivors are anomalies. The Imperium distrusts anomalies. I returned to manufactorum work with a new designation burned into my records. Penal veteran, conditional loyalty. My supervisor would not meet my eyes anymore. The line moved faster than I remembered, or perhaps I was slower. My hands shook when the presses slammed shut, a reflex left over from artillery barrages that never fully faded. The machine spirits did not care. Justice does not accommodate trauma. It counts output. The sermons changed again while I was gone. They always do. New enemies, new heresies, new reminders that suffering was proof of devotion. The preacher's voice echoed through the HAB blocks, distorted by poor transmission, but the message was clear enough. The Emperor protects, but only those who deserve it. Justice ensures the rest are corrected. I wondered, sometimes, what deserving meant. That question was my next crime.
It was small, insignificant, a private thought spoken aloud to no one in particular. I was alone in my HAB, staring at a crack in the ochre wall where moisture had gathered and paint peeled like dead skin. I said it quietly, barely a whisper, more breath than sound. Deserve. The word tasted strange, foreign. The walls listened. They always do. I do not know who reported it. Justice does not concern itself with sources once a process begins. A whisper is enough. A probability spike. An anomaly in behavioral metrics. The system flags you long before a human hand ever touches a form. The citation came 2 cycles later. Cognitive deviation. Unauthorized philosophical speculation. Potential destabilizing thought pattern. That was the phrasing. I read it 3 times before the meaning settled in. Thinking, it turned out, was a luxury. Processing was different this time. More clinical, less ceremony. I was not taken to a hall meant to inspire awe. I was taken to a room meant to erase context. White plasteel walls, harsh light, a single chair bolted to the floor. A servo skull hovered close enough that I could hear the faint whine of its anti-grav unit, like an insect trapped in glass. They asked me to explain myself. I tried, carefully. I chose words the way one chooses steps across a minefield, aware that precision mattered less than alignment. I spoke of faith, of gratitude, of loyalty forged in battle. I did not mention the crack in the wall or the word that had slipped out. It did not help. Justice does not listen for truth. It listens for deviation. The interrogator never raised his voice. He did not need to. His authority was embedded in the room, in the data slates scrolling beside him, in the knowledge that everything I said was being recorded, cross-referenced, weighed against a standard I would never be allowed to see. He told me justice was not punishment. It was correction. Correction hurts, he said, only when resistance is present. I learned how flexible that definition could be over the following weeks. They corrected my sleep first, or rather, they removed it. Cycles blurred together under constant light. Questions repeated with slight variations, designed to catch inconsistencies. Every pause was noted, every hesitation flagged. When my answers aligned too perfectly, they suspected rehearsal. When they wavered, they suspected doubt. Justice assumes guilt. The process exists to refine it. I saw others during transfer intervals, shuffling figures with hollow eyes and numbered collars. Some cried, some prayed, some stared straight ahead, mouths moving silently, as if reciting something they were afraid to forget. I wondered which of us justice considered closest to redemption. I wondered if redemption was even a category that still existed. One day, or perhaps night, time had lost meaning by then. They brought in a pick slate. Images flickered to life. Habs I recognized, streets I had walked, people I had known. Faces frozen mid-expression as red sigils overlaid them. Associates, the interrogator said. Potential influences, statistical risk factors. My heart rate spiked. The servo skull drifted closer. Justice does not punish alone. It radiates outward, touching everything connected to you. That is how it maintains order. Fear is more efficient when it is shared. They asked me to confirm identities. I hesitated. That was all it took. The pain that followed was not random. It was precise, calibrated to cause maximum compliance without risking long-term utility. Justice invests in what it breaks. They want you functional enough to understand why you are being corrected. I confirmed the names. I watched the sigils change color. When I was released, it was not because I was innocent. Innocence had never been part of the discussion. I was released because the system had extracted sufficient compliance to justify the resources spent on me. My record was updated, my risk profile adjusted upward, my movements restricted. I went back to work again.
That is the genius of imperial justice.
It does not remove you from society unless efficiency demands it. It returns you, altered, and lets you carry the lesson forward. You become a warning without a sign. People avoided me now. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Eyes dropped. Fear is contagious, and justice spreads it well. I did not blame them. Survival teaches you to distance yourself from anything marked. I began to notice the judges more after that. Not the Arbites in their armor, but the smaller ones. The clerks, the scribes, the adepts who stamped papers that decided lives without ever seeing the faces attached to them. Justice flowed through their hands like a current. They did not need malice. Indifference was enough. Once, in a transit corridor, I saw a child arguing with an administratum clerk. The child's ration chit had been rejected, expired by minutes. The clerk explained this calmly, mechanically. The child cried. The security servitor watched him passively. Justice was served when the child was removed for disorderly conduct. I felt something twist inside me then. Not anger, not sorrow, recognition. This was what justice looked like when it functioned perfectly. It was everywhere, in the air, in the walls, in the pauses between words. It did not roar, it whispered, it waited. It let you condemn yourself by failing to fit into its equations. The Imperium does not need fair laws. It needs predictable ones. That is the truth they never say aloud. Justice is not meant to be understood. It is meant to be obeyed. The moment you try to measure it by human standards, you have already failed. Humanity is the variable justice was designed to eliminate.
I no longer ask what I deserve. I ask what the system requires. Because I have learned this, and it is the only lesson that matters. In Warhammer's grim, dark future, justice is not about right or wrong. It is about keeping the machine running. And the machine does not care if you scream, as long as the noise does not disrupt production. There was a time when I believed justice ended at the precinct doors, that once a verdict was delivered and a sentence carried out. The system moved on. I was wrong. Justice never finishes with you. It lingers. It waits. It revisits. I began to notice how often my route to work intersected with the machinery of judgment. The data shrines along the transit tunnels displayed daily tallies of processed cases, numbers scrolling past faster than any human mind could follow. Resolved infractions, corrected behaviors, executed sentences. They called it transparency. They said it inspired trust. All it inspired in me was a growing awareness of scale. Justice was not a blade swung in anger. It was an assembly line, and it never shut down. Sometimes, Arbites patrols would stop the transit mid-cycle. Everyone would freeze where they stood, hands visible, eyes forward. A servo skull would float down the aisle, its lenses sweeping across us, tasting the air for deviations. It never explained what it was looking for. It didn't have to. Silence stretched until it either drifted away or stopped in front of someone whose fate had already been decided by an algorithm running far above our heads. When it stopped, there was no argument. Justice hates delays. I saw a woman once, not much older than I was, pulled from the line because her heartbeat spiked too sharply when the skull passed. Suspicion of concealed guilt. The charge read on the slate an enforcer held. She protested, insisted she had a condition, that anxiety caused it. The enforcer listened patiently, nodded once,
and authorized immediate detention for further evaluation. Justice does not accept excuses generated by the human body. I wondered how many people learned their own charges only after they were already guilty. At work, the posters changed again. They always do when morale drops. New slogans appeared between shifts, freshly printed, edges still sharp. Justice is mercy made strong. Obedience is freedom from doubt. Trust the process. I stared at them while my hands worked, memorizing the cracks in the walls behind the words. The slogans felt less like encouragement and more like reminders. You are being watched. You are expected to agree. I agreed. Outwardly, inwardly, I learned to feel nothing at all. That was when they promoted me. It surprised me at first. A minor elevation in responsibility. Line overseer, subsection gamma. No increase in pay worth mentioning, but authority nonetheless. I was to monitor output, report deviations, ensure compliance. The appointment notice arrived with a commendation attached. Demonstrated resilience, proven loyalty under corrective pressure. Justice rewards those it breaks successfully.
I wanted to refuse. That thought alone terrified me.
Refusal would have required explanation. Explanation invites scrutiny. Scrutiny invites correction. I accepted the role and the slate that came with it, its surface already filled with metrics and warning thresholds. They gave me access to records I had never seen before. Attendance logs, productivity curves, behavioral risk scores. Each worker reduced to data points that fluctuated daily. Green meant acceptable. Yellow meant watch. Red meant inevitable. I saw my own name there, buried in the system, permanently yellow, never allowed to be green again. Justice does not forget prior corrections. My job was to flag others before they reached red, to intervene early, to protect the system from inefficiency. That was how it was framed. I told myself I could soften it, that I could delay reports, that I could help. I was lying to myself. The first time I flagged someone, it was a young man named Havel. New assignment, unsteady hands, missed a quota by 3%. The system highlighted his name automatically, suggested escalation. I hesitated for nearly a minute, staring at the slate, my thumb hovering over the confirmation rune. I remembered my neighbor. I remembered the pick slate with red sigils. I remembered the pain. I pressed confirm. The next cycle, Havel was gone. His station reassigned. No announcement, no explanation. Justice had been served efficiently. I did not sleep that cycle. That was when I understood the final shape of justice in the Imperium. It is not imposed solely by those in armor. It is enforced by those who want to survive. It turns victims into instruments, guilt into fuel, fear into infrastructure. I was no longer merely subject to justice. I was part of it. The realization hollowed me out. Each report I filed felt heavier than the last. Each confirmation rune burned a little longer under my thumb. I told myself it was necessary, that the alternative was chaos, that order, even cruel order, was better than collapse. That is how justice teaches you to think. One cycle, a name appeared on my slate that made my vision blur. Familiar designation, old transit acquaintance, a man who had once shared a ration bar with me during a delayed shift. His productivity dipped after a family reassignment. Understandable, human. The system did not care. I had a choice, such as it was. Delay the report and draw attention to myself, or comply and let justice proceed. I thought of the slogans, of the sermons, of the interrogator's calm voice explaining correction. I filed the report. Later, alone in my hab, I stared at my reflection in the darkened lumen panel. I barely recognized the person looking back. Older, harder, empty in places I hadn't known could go numb. Justice had not just followed me home, it had moved in. I understood then why the Imperium endured. Not because its justice was righteous, not because it was fair, but because it was thorough. Because it left no one untouched. Because it taught everyone eventually to participate in their own oppression. There are no innocent witnesses in this system. Only those who have not yet been processed. I no longer believe in redemption. Redemption implies forgiveness, and justice in the Imperium does not forgive. It records, it categorizes, it escalates.
I wake each cycle before the alarm sounds, heart already racing, mind already calculating risks. I choose my words carefully. I keep my face neutral. I do my job. Because justice is always watching, and I have learned the most important rule of all. Justice does not need you to believe in it. It only needs you to comply. Compliance becomes habit before it becomes belief. I noticed it one cycle when the alarm failed to sound and I woke anyway, eyes snapping open at the exact minute my shift should begin. My body had learned the schedule better than my mind ever could. Justice had rewritten me at a level deeper than thought. I lay there for a moment, listening to the pipes, feeling the hive's endless vibration through the floor, and understood that even sleep was now conditional. I rose, dressed, checked my slate. No new citations, no new warnings. Relief came, thin and fleeting. Justice had spared me another day, not out of kindness, but because I had performed within acceptable variance. On the transit platform, a man collapsed 2 lines ahead of me. Old, judging by the stoop and the way his hands shook. A crowd gathered instinctively, then immediately dispersed when an Arbeits drone descended, its presence enough to reassert order. Medicae servitors arrived, scanned him, and marked him non-viable for immediate treatment. Resource inefficiency. He was moved aside so the line could continue. Justice was served by preventing delay. No one protested, not because we were cruel, but because we understood the cost of disruption. Compassion is a liability in a system calibrated for endurance. The Imperium does not survive because its people are strong. It survives because it teaches weakness to hide. At the Manufactorum, the line supervisor above me was replaced, quietly. One cycle his name was there, the next it was not. His productivity metrics had slipped into red. I wondered how long it took before he realized justice had turned its gaze on him. I wondered if he had thought, as I once did, that good service would protect him. It never does. Justice is not reciprocal. It does not reward loyalty with safety. It uses loyalty to extend its reach. My authority expanded again. More access, more responsibility, more chances to become the thing that had broken me. I told myself this was survival, that I was adapting, that adaptation was not the same as surrender. That was another lie. The first time someone begged me directly, it almost broke the illusion I had built. A woman from subsection Delta, mother of 2, though the records did not include that. Her output had dipped after her youngest was reassigned to the Schola Progenium. She stood in front of me, eyes hollow, voice shaking, asking not for mercy, but for time. Justice does not grant time. I listened. I nodded. I told her I would see what I could do. That night, I stared at her file until my eyes burned. I considered altering the metrics. A minor adjustment, a delay. The system might not notice, but justice always notices. Even thinking about it was a risk. Every action leaves a trace. Every deviation becomes data. I imagined the interrogation room again, the light, the calm voice explaining correction. I filed the report. The next cycle, her station was empty. I stopped looking at names after that. Names invite memory. Memory invites doubt. Doubt is the seed of deviation. I understood then why justice in the Imperium is framed as impersonal, why it hides behind process and protocol. If you believe no one is responsible, you can endure almost anything. Responsibility implies choice. Choice implies guilt. Justice removes choice. The sermons spoke of this, though never directly. They spoke of surrendering the self to something greater, of finding peace in obedience, of trusting that the Emperor's justice, vast and unknowable, must be correct because it is absolute. I tried to believe that. I really did. But belief requires hope, and justice had burned that out of me long ago. There are days now when I feel nothing at all. When a red alert flashes on my slate and I acknowledge it without a flicker of emotion. When a transport passes carrying condemned souls toward correctional facilities or firing lines and I do not look up. This numbness is not failure. It is success by the system's standards. Justice has optimized me. Sometimes, late in the cycle, when the hive quiets just enough to hear its own breathing, I remember the person I was before all this. The one who thought justice was about right and wrong, about fairness,
about protecting the innocent. That person feels like someone else's memory. I know now that justice in the Imperium is not a shield. It is a pressure, constant, unrelenting, applied evenly until everything either conforms or breaks. The broken are removed. The conformed become enforcers, willingly or not. This is why rebellion fails, not because the Imperium is too strong, but because justice has already trained us to police ourselves, to fear standing out more than standing together, to choose survival over solidarity every time. I am not proud of what I have become. I am still alive. That is the distinction justice teaches you to value. If you ask me now what justice is, I would not quote the Lex Imperialis. I would not speak of the Emperor's will. I would tell you this instead. Justice is the reason you lower your voice without knowing why. Justice is the reason you do not help when help would be seen. Justice is the reason you survive while better people vanish. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is patient. And one day, whether by age, error, or simple statistical drift, it will come for me again. My metrics will slip, my reactions will slow, my usefulness will decline. When that happens, justice will not remember my years of service. It will only remember that I am no longer efficient, and I will go the same way as all the others, processed and erased, my life reduced to a resolved case in a scrolling tally no one reads. That is the dark reality of justice in the Imperium. Not that it is cruel, but that it works.
It works so well that you forget there was ever another way things could have been. I see it now in the children, most clearly. The hive raises them before their parents ever can. From the moment they can walk, they are taught to stand in lines. From the moment they can speak, they are taught what words are safe. They recite catechisms about duty and order, with voices still soft enough to sound innocent. Justice reaches them long before crime ever could. I watch them on the transit decks, small hands gripping ration tins, eyes already trained not to wander. When an Arbite's patrol passes, they straighten instinctively, mimicking the adults around them. No one taught them explicitly. They learned by watching who disappears. That is how justice reproduces itself. Once, during an equipment audit, a junior clerk made a mistake. A real one, not a statistical deviation. A shipment misrouted, parts delayed. Production slowed for almost 7 minutes. 7 minutes was enough. She stood trembling before me, data slate clutched to her chest like a shield, explaining through tears how the error occurred. She expected anger. She expected punishment. What she did not expect was my silence. I stared at her and felt something dangerous stir inside me. Recognition, not empathy. That would have been too obvious. It was the memory of myself, years ago, standing in another room, believing explanation mattered. Justice did not require my emotion. It required my action. I filed the report. Later, I heard she had been reassigned to a correctional logistics unit below the mid-hive, where air quality shortens life expectancy by decades. The system called it proportional response. Proportional to what? I no longer knew. Sometimes I wonder how many lives have passed through my hands without ever touching them. How many endings I have initiated with a single confirmation rune. The number is large enough now that it has lost meaning. Justice is measured in volume, not impact. There are days when I think about stopping, not rebelling, not sabotaging anything dramatic, just stopping, letting my metrics slip, letting the system notice me again, letting justice turn inward and finish what it started all those years ago. Then I imagine the process, the interrogation, the correction, the way my existence would ripple outward, touching others connected to me, flagging them, dragging them down into my failure. Justice makes martyrs inefficient, so I continue. I have learned how to disappear in plain sight, how to meet expectations precisely enough to avoid attention, but never so well that I rise. Excellence invites scrutiny. Mediocrity is safer. Justice prefers predictability over brilliance. The hive itself seems to understand this. It groans and shifts endlessly, ancient structures sagging but never collapsing. Repairs are constant, never complete. Perfection is unnecessary. Function is enough. One cycle. During a routine systems check, My slate froze. Just for a moment, the screen flickered, and for that brief second, all the metrics vanished. No warnings, no quotas, no names, just blank light. My breath caught. The silence felt immense. Then the data returned, scrolling as always, and the moment passed. But for that fraction of a second, I had glimpsed a world without justice. It terrified me more than anything else ever had, because without it, there was no structure, no explanation for suffering, no reason that made the pain make sense. Justice, for all its cruelty, provides narrative. It tells you why things are the way they are, even if the reason is simply because they must be. Remove that, and all that remains is chaos. That is the final lie justice tells, that it is the only alternative to anarchy, that without it, humanity would tear itself apart. Perhaps that is true. Or perhaps justice has simply ensured we can no longer imagine anything else. I am older now. The lines on my face are deeper. My hands ache in ways that no Medicaid allocation will ever justify treating. I feel my usefulness declining in small, measurable ways. Reaction times, endurance, compliance latency. Justice will notice eventually. When it does, there will be no anger, no betrayal, only acceptance. I have seen too much of the process to expect anything else. I will stand where I am told. I will answer the questions. I will sign where indicated. I will be corrected. And somewhere, far above or far below, the machine will continue to run without interruption. That is what justice is for. Not to save us, not to judge us, but to ensure that even in our removal, nothing truly changes. I tell you this not as a warning, and not as a plea, just as a record. Because justice loves records. And in the end, that is all any of us ever become. Records endure longer than people. I learned that when my father's designation resurfaced in the system. I had not searched for it. I had not even thought about him in years. Thought, too, is something justice tracks. The record appeared automatically during a lineage audit. His name buried beneath layers of annotations, infractions, corrections, and final disposition. Deceased. Productive lifespan concluded. Assets reclaimed. I stared at the slate longer than protocol allowed. My father had believed in justice. Truly believed. He used to tell me that if you kept your head down and your hands busy, the Imperium would have no reason to notice you. He died believing that, convinced right up until the end that his own processing had been a misunderstanding that would be corrected once the right form reached the right desk. Justice had corrected him instead. Seeing his record did something to me that years of interrogations never had. It stripped away the last illusion that obedience was protection. Obedience was simply another metric, a useful one, but never sufficient. The system had outlived him. It would outlive me. That was the point. From then on, I paid closer attention to the language justice used to describe death. Never death, never killing, resolution, closure, asset liquidation. Even execution reports spoke of final corrective measures. Words smoothed the edges of reality until nothing sharp remained. Language was part of the mechanism, a lubricant that allowed cruelty to move without friction. I began to hear it everywhere. A worker crushed by a press due to fatigue was not mourned. He was cited as an example of safety protocol failure. A family displaced by HAB reallocation was noted as an improvement in spatial efficiency. A firing squad report listed ammunition expenditure before it listed names. Justice spoke in numbers because numbers do not scream. One cycle, I was summoned to observe a tribunal. Not as a defendant, as a witness. Oversight training, they called it. Exposure to the process so I could better understand the gravity of my role. The chamber was smaller than I expected, intimate, designed to make the accused feel close to authority, as if proximity itself were a privilege. The man on trial was accused of hoarding unregistered ration supplements, enough to feed his family for an extra week. The evidence was clear, the outcome predetermined. He tried to speak anyway. He talked about his children, about shortages, about how the shipment delays weren't his fault, about how he had worked faithfully for decades. His voice cracked. He cried. It was undignified. It was human.
The judges listened without expression. When the verdict came, it was delivered in a tone so neutral it bordered on boredom. Guilty. Correctional labor. Family assets seized to offset administrative costs. Justice did not raise its voice. As the man was led away, he looked at us. Not at the judges. At us. The witnesses, the functionaries. The ones who would return to our routines afterward. His eyes searched our faces for something. Recognition. Solidarity. Proof that someone still saw him as more than a case. I looked away. That was when I finally understood my greatest crime. It was not the reports I filed. It was not the lives I flagged. It was not even the moments when I chose survival over decency. It was my silence. Justice thrives on silence. It depends on it. Noise can be managed. Violence can be answered with greater violence. But silence allows the system to pretend nothing is wrong. Silence becomes consent. I had been silent for so long that it felt natural. After that tribunal, I noticed how often justice put people like me in rooms like that. Not to learn, to normalize, to ensure that when our turn came, we would already know how to stand, how to listen, how to accept. Preparation is mercy by imperial standards. I do not know how long I have left. My metrics hover closer to yellow-red thresholds each cycle. Younger overseers move faster, think faster, report faster. Justice values speed now. Efficiency always increases as empathy decreases. Sometimes, late in the cycle, I imagine what it would be like to speak, not to shout, not to incite rebellion, just to name things honestly. To say this is cruelty, this is fear, this is control disguised as order. Then I imagine the consequences, not just for me, but for everyone connected to me by blood, by work, by a few shared words in a transit corridor years ago. Justice makes sure your courage is never purely your own. So I record instead. I speak here, in this quiet place, to you who listen from a distance. Maybe you call it lore, maybe you call it story. That is safer. Justice tolerates stories better than truths. But know this, nothing I have told you is exaggerated. Nothing is symbolic. Nothing is metaphor. This is justice as it exists every cycle, on every hive world, in every corridor. Your authority has learned that it does not need to be loved, only obeyed. I am not asking you to hate it. Hate is loud. Hate is inefficient. I am asking you to understand it. Because once you do, you will see it everywhere. In the way people speak carefully. In the way crowds thin when uniforms appear. In the way suffering is explained instead of prevented. And if you ever find yourself wondering how such a vast, cruel empire could endure for 10,000 years, remember this. It is not held together by heroes. It is not preserved by justice. It survives because justice taught everyone, eventually, to look away. Looking away becomes instinct. I do it now without realizing. My eyes slide past sealed hab doors marked with fresh sigils. I step over stains on the transit deck without wondering whose blood they were. I hear screams sometimes, distant, muffled by layers of plasteel and bureaucracy. And my first thought is not concern, but calculation. Is this on my route? Will this delay my shift? Will justice notice if I stop? This is how it wins. Not through terror alone, but through conditioning. There was a day when justice tested me directly again, not as an overseer, not as a witness. As a subject, it began with a discrepancy, a minor one, a data echo in my file that did not align with projected behavioral models. Too stable, the system decided. Too consistent. Stability over time becomes suspicious. No one remains unchanged under pressure unless something is being concealed. I was summoned. The room was different this time. Smaller. No servo skulls, no audience. Just a single interrogator and a slate resting between us like an offering. He knew my history. Of course he did. Justice always reads you more thoroughly than you read yourself. He asked me if I was content. The question caught me off guard. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was absurd. Contentment is not a category the Imperium measures. Hunger, productivity, loyalty, risk, these things matter. Contentment does not. I answered carefully. I said I served. I said I endured. I said I was grateful for continued utility.
He nodded, fingers tapping softly against the slate. He asked if I ever thought about speaking out. The air seemed to thicken. My heart rate betrayed me despite years of discipline. I denied it immediately, too quickly. I corrected myself, slowed my speech, framed my denial in devotional language. The interrogator watched without expression. Justice watches for patterns, not words. He asked me about my father. That was the moment I knew the system was closing its fingers around me again. Lineage audits are never casual. They are warnings disguised as questions. I spoke of duty, of legacy, of the honor of service. He let me speak until I ran out of things that sounded convincing. Then he said something I had not heard before. He said justice was merciful. I almost laughed. Mercy, he explained, was not forgiveness. It was efficiency, allowing a flawed component to continue functioning as long as it remained useful. Correction without removal. Surveillance without escalation. Mercy, in the Imperium, is prolonged use. He told me my silence had been noted, my compliance appreciated, my internal stability admired. And then he told me that stability can calcify into something dangerous: stagnation. Justice abhors stagnation. He offered me a choice. Real or not, I still do not know. Increased responsibility, deeper access, or reassignment to a lower tier where my risk profile could be simplified. Simplified is another word justice uses when it means shortened. I accepted. After that, I saw justice from higher up the spine of the hive. Not the apex, never the apex, but high enough to see how vast the machinery truly was. Entire departments existed solely to refine punishment, to analyze suffering metrics, to determine how much pain produced obedience without waste. Justice is studied here, improved, optimized. I saw reports from other worlds. Hive riots pacified not by force, but by selective enforcement. Public executions reduced by percentage after introducing randomized disappearances instead. Fear, the data showed, was more effective when unpredictable. I saw correctional worlds where justice was not a response, but an environment. Planets designed to grind down the disobedient into something reusable, not redeemed, repurposed. I saw how often justice was wrong. That was the most dangerous thing of all. Wrong arrests, misidentified heresy, statistical anomalies that ruined lives without justification. The system noted these errors, archived them, adjusted probabilities. It never apologized. Justice does not correct itself by restoring what it destroys. It corrects itself by refining future destruction. Knowing this did not make me braver, it made me smaller. I began to understand why the Imperium fears heresy more than invasion. An external enemy can be fought. An internal question can spread. Justice exists to cauterize questions before they infect others. This is why trials are public, why punishments are ritualized, why silence is rewarded. Justice is theater, and everyone is part of the audience, whether they want to be or not. I am tired now, not just in my body, but in my soul, if that word still means anything here. I feel the weight of years spent bending without breaking, and I wonder which fate is worse. There are moments, rare and dangerous, when I imagine justice failing. Not collapsing in fire and rebellion, but simply stopping. The ledgers freeze, the patrols pause, the algorithms go dark. I imagine what people would do first. Some would scream, some would weep, some would kill, some would help. Most would hesitate, waiting for permission that never comes. That is justice's greatest triumph. It has taught us that action without authorization feels like sin. If you are listening to this, if you are still following my words, understand what I am really telling you. Justice in the Imperium is not a law, it is a condition. It shapes how you think, how you feel, how you imagine the future. It convinces you that survival is virtue, and silence is wisdom. It turns moral instinct into statistical risk. I do not know how my story ends. Justice will decide that when the numbers shift far enough. There will be no drama, no revelation, just a notice, a summons, a final correction, and the hive will hum on, indifferent. If there is any truth left worth holding on to, it is this: justice does not make monsters. It makes ordinary people do monstrous things quietly, and then it calls that order, quietly enough that no one notices until it is too late. I noticed it in myself first when the fear began to fade, not disappear. Fear never disappears. It just changes shape. Mine became familiar, like the ache in an old joint or the background thrum of the hive itself. Always there, always manageable. Fear, once normalized, loses its edge. And when fear loses its edge, justice grows uneasy. That was when I understood the final cruelty of the system. It does not merely punish resistance, it punishes adaptation. A compliant citizen who still feels fear is useful. A compliant citizen who no longer feels anything is unpredictable. I began to be watched more closely after that. Not overtly, subtly. Extra audits, redundant reviews, conversations that circled the same questions from different mouths. Justice testing for cracks. They asked me to evaluate a case that should not have reached my level. Minor infraction. Unauthorized possession of a devotional token. Hand-carved, crude, non-sanctioned iconography. The accused was a boy, 15 perhaps, thin, eyes too old for his face. He stood in the chamber where I had once stood, trying to keep his voice steady as he explained that his mother had made it. That she said the emperor listened better if you carved his likeness yourself. That she had died last cycle in a had collapse, and this was all he had left. The judges waited for my assessment. This was justice testing me. I could feel it, the weight of the moment, the invisible lines connecting this decision to 1,000 others, each one nudging my trajectory closer to some inevitable conclusion. I knew the correct response: confiscation, re-education, minimal correction, enough to erase sentiment without wasting resources. I also knew what justice wanted to see. Not mercy, consistency. I delivered the recommendation with a voice that did not shake. The token was destroyed. The boy was reassigned to labor education. The case was closed. Later, alone, I realized my hands were trembling. Justice had not been satisfied by my compliance. It wanted to know if I still felt something. That was when I began to understand that justice is not static. It evolves, it adapts. It grows bored with the same patterns of obedience. It looks for new ways to test loyalty, new thresholds to push. There is no finish line, no point at which you have proven yourself enough. The Imperium does not reward virtue, it consumes it. I began to see people like me disappear more frequently. Mid-level functionaries, overseers, analysts. Those who knew enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be indispensable. One cycle they were present. The next, their names were grayed out, their access revoked, their desks cleared. No announcements, no explanations. Justice trims its own branches to stay sharp. I started recording more than I was supposed to. Not officially, not in the system. In my mind, in fragments, in memories I rehearsed during sleepless cycles so they would not fade. If justice erased me, at least something of me would have existed, even if only as a pattern of thought. That is all resistance becomes in the end: memory. One cycle, during a data convergence review, I saw projections for the next century of hive operation. Birth rates, death rates, productivity curves, correctional throughput. The numbers formed a smooth, elegant arc, suffering rendered invisible by abstraction. There was no category for happiness. There was no metric for dignity. Justice had optimized those out generations ago. I realized then that the Imperium does not believe in people. It believes in continuity. Individuals are noise. Justice exists to reduce noise. And yet here I am, still speaking. Perhaps that is my final deviation. I do not tell this story because I think it will change anything. Justice does not fall because someone speaks the truth. It falls, if it ever does, because the machinery becomes too complex to sustain itself. Because correction outpaces creation. Because fear can no longer motivate what exhaustion has hollowed out. Or perhaps it never falls at all. Perhaps 10,000 years from now, another voice like mine will whisper the same things into the dark, convinced they are alone in seeing the truth. Justice counts on that too. If this is my last record, then let it be clear. The dark reality of justice in Warhammer's future is not that it is evil. Evil implies intent. Justice here is far worse than that. It is logical. It is efficient. It is justified.
And because of that, it will endure long after people like me are reduced to resolved cases and reclaimed assets. The hive will hum, the ledgers will scroll, the machine will run, and justice, cold, patient, and absolute, will call that peace.
The end came quietly. Not with a roar, not with fire, not with the clang of gibbets or the screams of the condemned. The hive was already humming, indifferent, as it had for 10,000 cycles before me, and would for 10,000 after. I walked through corridors that had been mapped into my memory, as if by instinct. Every vibration in the floor, every pulse of the lumen strips, every scent of recycled air, a reminder that I was still here, still counted, still noted. Justice had followed me to the edge of comprehension. It had tested me, refined me, reshaped me. I had become both subject and instrument. My compliance had been cataloged, my fear logged, my hesitation measured in increments too small for a human eye to see. And yet, through all of that, I had survived. That was the system's greatest lesson. Survival is not reward. Survival is data. Survival is proof that the machinery functions as intended. I stopped in front of the chamber that would be my final assignment. Not a tribunal, not a line of arbites. Just a sealed door, a slate glowing with my metrics, and the quiet, infinite hum of the hive beyond. I understood at last that there is no dramatic revelation, no heroic last stand, no miracle of conscience in the Imperium. There is only observation, categorization, correction, and eventually, the erasure of inefficiency. I took a breath, perhaps my first unobserved breath in decades. Perhaps it did not matter. The system would record it anyway, somewhere in a data archive that would outlive me. My life, reduced to a series of numbers and annotations, yet somehow still enduring long enough to witness its own disappearance. I thought of the people I had seen erased, the lives I had cataloged, the moments of quiet terror and silent compliance. I thought of my father, of the boy with the hand-carved token, of the clerks and overseers whose obedience had been praised even as it consumed them. And I understood. Justice is not cruel because it hates. It is cruel because it is absolute. It is cruel because it is necessary. Necessary for the Imperium, for the hive, for the machinery that counts, corrects, and continues without pause. I pressed the confirmation rune one final time. My designation blinked, the slate updated, metrics recorded, compliance logged. The door hissed open. I stepped inside, knowing that my story would continue only as data, only as record. Perhaps it would teach another observer, or perhaps it would vanish into the infinite hum of bureaucracy. Perhaps it did not matter. The hive continued to breathe, the pipes rattled, the machines throbbed, and somewhere above, beyond reach, justice waited. Patient, indifferent, absolute. I closed my eyes, and in that silence, I realized what the dark reality of justice truly is. It never ends. It does not tire. It does not falter. It endures. And in its endurance, it makes us all participants, witnesses, instruments, and ultimately, nothing more than data. The hum of the hive rose around me, wrapping everything in its cold, eternal embrace. I exhaled, and for the first time in decades, I felt the faintest flicker of understanding. In the Imperium, justice is not a story told. It is a life lived, quietly, fully, inevitably, until it is no longer yours to claim. And then finally, I became part of the ledger. Everything continued, and justice endured. The ledger accepted me without ceremony. There was no moment of clarity, no final pain sharp enough to mark the boundary between what I was and what I became. Just a soft chime, a change in status, a confirmation that my existence had transitioned from active variable to archive record. Justice prefers transitions that do not draw attention. Attention suggests disruption. Disruption suggests inefficiency. I am speaking now only because memory lingers longer than flesh. If you are hearing this, then understand that what remains of me is not a soul, not a ghost, not a warning carved into stone. It is residue.
the echo left behind when a compliant life passes fully into the system that shaped it. Justice does not erase everything at once. It leaves impressions, patterns, lessons for those still processing.
Somewhere, another overseer wakes before the alarm, heart already calculating risk. Somewhere, a clerk hesitates for half a second before stamping a form, then stamps it anyway. Somewhere, a child learns to lower their voice when uniforms pass. These are not coincidences. They are continuity. That is justice's true victory. Not that it punishes the guilty, not that it protects the innocent, but that it teaches everyone, eventually, to behave as if guilt is inevitable and innocence irrelevant. The Imperium will tell you justice is sacred. The Lex will tell you it is eternal. The sermons will tell you it is divine. I will tell you this. Justice is habit. It is learned behavior reinforced by fear and rewarded with survival. It is the slow erosion of outrage until silence feels natural. It is the moment when you stop asking whether something is right and start asking only whether it is allowed. That is how civilizations last this long. Not through hope, not through righteousness, through endurance stripped of meaning. If there is any mercy left in this universe, it is not found in the courts or the precincts or the ledgers. It exists only in the rare moments before justice notices you, in the breath you take before lowering your eyes, in the thought you almost speak aloud but do not. Those moments are brief. Justice is very attentive. I do not ask you to resist. Resistance is loud, and justice is very good at silencing loud things. I do not ask you to rebel. Rebellion feeds the machine just as surely as obedience. I ask you only to see, to understand that when the Imperium speaks of justice, it is not speaking of fairness. It is speaking of control refined into routine, of cruelty made ordinary, of a system so vast that no single person can be blamed, and therefore no one ever is. That is the darkest truth of all. There are no villains here, only processes, and processes do not feel regret. The hive will keep humming, the patrols will keep walking, the ledgers will keep scrolling, and justice will continue to cull this order. If my story has any purpose, it is not to shock you, or sadden you, or inspire you. It is simply to remind you that in the grim darkness of the far future, justice is not something that happens to you. It is something you become, and once you are part of it, the Imperium no longer needs to watch you, because you will watch yourself. Forever. Forever is a long time to be watched by nothing at all. And yet, even now, even as a record, even as an echo flattened into sanctioned language and storage indices, I can feel the shape of justice around me. Not as pressure, not as fear, as absence. The absence left when choice has been fully removed. This is the final refinement. You are not crushed. You are not broken. You are resolved. The Imperium does not need to remember me as a man. It remembers me as proof. Proof that the system worked. Proof that correction scales. Proof that even those who see the mechanism clearly can be folded back into it without friction. Somewhere, a clerk will access my file generations from now. They will not read it. They will skim it. They will see green compliance bands, controlled deviations, productive lifespan metrics. They will see that justice functioned exactly as designed. They will move on. That is how memory dies in the Imperium, not violently. Efficiently. I wonder sometimes, though wondering no longer matters, how many others felt this same quiet ending. How many lives tapered off into acceptable conclusions while the hive never noticed the change in its rhythm. How many people believed, until the last moment, that their obedience had meaning beyond prolongation. The hive does not mourn, it reallocates. If there is a sound to justice at this stage, it is not the crack of a shock maul or the bark of a verdict. It is the soft click of a checkbox marked complete. The muted tone of a system acknowledging that nothing further is required from you. You have been useful enough. And so you are done. This is the truth no sermon ever speaks, that justice does not seek repentance. It does not seek understanding. It does not even seek belief. It seeks closure, a closed case, a balanced ledger, a life that no longer introduces uncertainty. I think, if I am allowed one final human thought, that this is why the Imperium fears chaos so deeply. Chaos cannot be archived. Chaos cannot be resolved. Chaos asks questions that justice cannot process. Order, even cruel order, is easier. So the machine continues. Children will grow up learning when to be silent. Workers will learn how much suffering is optimal. Overseers will learn when to look away. And justice will remain untouched by all of it, pristine in its indifference. If you are still listening now, at the very end of this long accounting, then you understand something most inside the Imperium never articulate. Justice here is not broken, it is perfected. Perfected to the point where it no longer needs hatred. Perfected to the point where it no longer needs cruelty, only participation. That is the final inheritance it leaves behind. Not terror, not pain, but a world where no one remembers how to imagine anything else. The hive hums, the records sleep, the Imperium endures. And justice, unchanged, unquestioned, eternal, remains exactly what it has always been. Not a force of good, but a condition of existence.